Don Mischer, you have been producing these Emmys. This is what, your 12th one coming up. I want to know, what do you know now that you wish you knew 11 Emmys or 12 Emmys ago? The number one thing.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I must say that producing the Emmys is fun because I was a child, a creature of television from my very early days as just a young boy, and so doing them and is really terrific because the Emmys are about looking at the best of television, and when you look at the best of television, and it's certainly true this year. I mean, the good stuff is really good. There is a lot of mediocre material on television, but on Emmy night you get to look at the very best. And I guess in terms of what I know now, it is just to relax and one thing I've understood really clearly is that but the gun has not yet gone off, and the gun will not go off until July the 10th, and then we are really at a full sprint all the way to the finish. So, but it's very exciting. We were in New York yesterday. We met with Seth Meyers, and he's very excited, has some wonderful ideas, and it's just going to be great. So we're very excited about doing them again.
Okay, Chris, we've got here with us this award show god that you and I have been following closely all these years. What is your first question for Don Mischer? The heat is on. The pressure's on.
Well, you mentioned Seth, and the show is on NBC this year, so that wasn't a surprise that he's hosting. But I do wonder, Jimmy Fallon, hosts the flagship show for NBC, The Tonight Show. I was wondering why he wasn't hosting and Seth is.
Well, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, Jimmy has done this. We, in fact, produced his show 4 years ago, which was, quite successful. And so it may just be that they wanted to give Seth a shot. He's the new man, on NBC, and he's coming on strong. And so I'm just really pleased we're working with him. I certainly hope we will have Jimmy there. He probably will be, because I'm sure he's going to have some nominations. But anyway, so we're great, and you guys know that generally speaking, the Emmy hosts come from the late night talent that the respective network that's airing the Emmys, has on the air. So.
But that's not always the case, Don. I want to take you back to what I think, and I can't remember if you produced this one or not, what I think is one of the greatest Emmy shows ever, and it was hosted. Did you do the Angela Lansbury year?
Yes, I did.
All right, let me tell you something. This is why I quarrel with the premise that you just mentioned, which is, oh, the host should be from the late night. I don't think so. Not all the time. That Angela Lansbury show was one of the great award shows ever, and she didn't tell a single joke. She presided from that stage as a queen. She was at the time queen of television with Murder, She Wrote and the rest of it, and there was kind of magic to it. Do you see what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean, and these things kind of go through phases. The year before the Angela Lansbury show, there were 3 or 4 hosts, and as can happen on a live broadcast like that, I think one was Dennis Miller. I'm not sure if one was Gary Shandling. But there were a number of hosts, and what happened the year before was that sometimes when things don't go really well, people get up on stage and kind of turn against the show, and that happened the year before Angela Lansbury did it. That was the last year that the show was on Fox, and at that point, ABC had kind of preempted the reestablishment of the wheel, so they had. Hold on, I'm making my tea.
Oh, okay.
Another thing that was happening at that time, if I recall correctly, was that ABC had snuck in and made an offer to get the Emmys for 4 consecutive years without consulting with the other networks that were interested in having it returned to the wheel. Fox had had it exclusively. And there was going to be a boycott of the ABC Emmy show by everyone. That is, the other networks, CBS, NBC, and Fox were going to boycott it. And there was a big issue for Angela, because at that time she had the #1 show in America, Murder, She Wrote, on CBS on Sunday night. And there was a period in which Angela and I were talking almost daily, where she wasn't sure whether she would in fact be able to go against the wishes of her network and decide unilaterally, more or less, to host that Emmy broadcast. That Emmy show was one in which the show had been going downhill and was kind of in a period of making fun of itself. And that show was a show in which we just made a decision, let's try and stop the bleeding, and let's try and get this thing back to respectable. And that's what we did. And we got some criticism for it being a little bit dull or whatever, but she was wonderful. And we had just come off of 3 years with her, because we asked her to come host the Tony Awards. So the 3 years before that, she had done a magnificent job for us hosting the Tonys on Broadway. So we had a good relationship, and she decided to go along with us. But it's great to hear you say that, you know, because I'm glad that people still remember that. It was an earnest show, but it had a lot of depth and a lot of meaning in it, and it was a first step, I think, in kind of restoring respect to the Emmy broadcast after it kind of slipped a little bit. But
it felt very important to watch and special. Chris, pipe in on all this stuff. Give us your opinion.
Well, I'm wondering, oh, I love that particular one. I remember that coming off those Fox years, and each year it seemed to get more and more raw and you know, the kinds of jokes that were on stage. And I remember that it was just like, you know, Angela brought back prestige and glory to the show.
Yeah, she did. There's no question about that. And part of the difficult job when you produce these things is to try and walk that line about making something entertaining by current standards, you know, to a television audience, and also keeping the respect that you need, because it is, I mean, these shows serve two purposes. It's the same with the Oscars or any of them. I mean, the first issue is to honor the people of that industry who have done the work. And in many ways, you could make an argument that the best way to do that would be in a hotel room and forget about television. Because once you start to televise something, other conditions come in. The question about how interesting are various awards to viewers across the country. You know, in many instances, they're not that interested in some of the lesser awards. When I say lesser, I mean less high-profile, you know, nominees and so forth. So one of your jobs always is to, how do you combine this mix? I mean, you want the show to be entertaining. You're fighting for ratings. That's very important to the network that's sponsoring the show. But you also have an obligation to the Academy to protect what their values are and to honor those people that they need to honor, whether they're above the line or below the line, and whether they're known in households around the country or not.
Don, let me bring up a beef I have about this whole issue of the clock ticking and you having to wrap up that show by 11 o'clock, having to worry about the affiliates. Sometimes, I'm talking about the Oscars here, sometimes nobody seems to care, and the show runs for 14 hours, and they go, what the hell? We throw in a few more commercials, everybody makes more money, and it's a great show. Other times, you're too fast with that clock, and let me bring up one example of where I was screaming at the TV, and you produced this Oscars. I'm talking about the scene, brilliantly set up, absolutely magic time. It was so great. Billy Crystal comes on stage to salute Bob Hope. what an idea, and you set it up so well, and it was goosebump time. It was so cool, and then it just got started, and then you guys kicked it out. I mean, I was going, no, if there was one scene you should have just let go and allow the heart to. What happened?
Number one, I'm glad to know that you remembered that. That we didn't make any cuts in that when we were on the air. That was the extent to which we had hoped to do it. It was very complicated. We had to rotoscope Bob Hope out of an old clip and adjust him electronically to fit behind a podium. It was real complicated to have that work where it worked on television and worked in front of the audience at what was then the Kodak. And we were able to do about 52 or 53 seconds of it. It took weeks to do that. And that's about all we intended to do. I mean, the toughest thing is when you've got a great acceptance speech. And the times that I have felt the worst in decisions that we've had to make have been times in which someone gets up there and it is the highlight of their life. It is a highlight of their career. It's a moment they will never forget. And they've worked forever, and their families and relatives are proud, and you tell them you've got 45 seconds. It's really, truly unfortunate. But let me explain one reason why this happened. Let's take the Emmys coming up on NBC, August 25. The Emmys are now broadcast live here at 5 o'clock, and they're broadcast live again, repeated basically at 8 o'clock. So if you're living in Los Angeles or on the West Coast or in the Mountain Time Zone, you're conditioned through years and years of watching the Emmys. You're conditioned to watch it generally at 8 o'clock Pacific Time, 7 o'clock Mountain Time. And so that will be the largest audience, there's no question. So in LA, we go on the air at 5 o'clock. If we run over 5 minutes, which means we don't get off the air until 5 minutes after 8 o'clock, and you live in Los Angeles and you turn in to listen to the Emmys, you're going to tune in just when the Dramatic Series Award is being given. All right? And we've kind of blown it. You know, so there's increased pressure, not just from the affiliates, but from the fact that the show repeats itself right away. Okay. And you'd like to start those things on the hour. The shows that I have personally been proudest of have been those shows in which we never had to play anyone off. 4 years ago, when Jimmy Fallon hosted the show, and also the year that Neil Patrick Harris hosted it, which was the year before that, which we produced both of those years, we never had to play anyone off. And I felt I don't think anybody else had even noticed it. But I mean, for me, it was, I just felt really wonderful. And as Gil Cates used to say, the award show gods smile on you where they don't smile on you. And, you know, you produce these shows, and the two most important things to making a successful show, you as a producer have absolutely no control over. And that is who wins and what they're going to say. And connected to that is how long they speak. When we go on the air, we're sitting there with 25 scenarios on a computer in front of us with different systems to get the show off the air on time. And if everybody kind of plays by the rules and you get a certain kind of momentum going, and both the Fallon years and the years with Neil, there was a certain pacing in the room that picked up and people kind of got it. And I noticed when I went back and checked the times, people got out of their seats quicker, they got to the microphone quicker, they got off the stage quicker. And if you're lucky enough to get that kind of a kind of rhythm going to the evening, you stand a good chance of doing it. But it's when we're on the air, that's the biggest battle we have. And you try and do that without being disrespectful. And you know, many times you've thought about funny ways we could do this. What's a funny way that you could encourage people to, you know, speed up their speeches or stop talking when they reach a certain time limit? At one point, I thought about bringing a trumpeter out, just a guy in a really fine white tie tuxedo, and if you start to talk too long, he just walks out with his trumpet and stands next to you like 4 or 5 feet away. And then if you continue to talk, he slowly picks up the horn, turns, faces you directly, and starts to play, you know? Now, and we've had a lot of funny ideas like that. The trouble is, having been there so many times, when you try something like that, and let's say he's talking about thanking agents and lawyers or whatever, and you walk out there with the guy who's going to play him off, right when the guy raises the horn, he will start talking about his father who he lost during the last year, and he hopes that he's looking down on him, you know, and this is for him. I mean, those are the kind of things that just are part of the fun of doing these shows.
Yeah. Chris.
I'm sorry to go on so long there.
No, it's fascinating to hear. Chris.
Oh, it is. And I'm wondering this year, especially for the Emmys, for the first time in forever, it's not going to be a Sunday night. It's a Monday night because of NBC football. What challenges have you already discovered that are going to happen for a Monday night Emmys?
Well, that's a very good question, and I must confess I'm a little worried about it. Monday is a working day. Sunday generally is not a working day. And when you do them on Sunday, it's hard enough to get people in their seats so that everybody is seated for that last, 30-second countdown to going on the air. And that's even difficult at times on Sunday. Getting people in their seats is never an easy thing to do. People come into the room. They're very excited about seeing one another. They get to meet people and talk about their work over the year. They see people they haven't seen all year. And so to get them to sit down and pay attention and be prepared for the show to begin is very, very difficult. We do things like close the bars 15 minutes ahead of time. We have ushers that go around and talent assistants that go around and get people in their seats. We're always concerned about the first 4 awards. Are all the nominees in their seats for the first 4 awards? I want to know that 10 minutes before we go on the air, But the other thing about Monday is there's going to be traffic around the Nokia and around the whole LA scene down there at Staples Center. People are going to be working. It's going to take much longer to get to the red carpet than it has taken for the past 10 or 15 years. So I'm concerned about being ready to go, at 5 o'clock. I mean, and so we're going to be trying extra hard with police, in terms of getting the cars up and dropping them off, getting them through the red carpet. There could be some issues, and hopefully we can anticipate those and handle them.
Now, Don, nothing ever goes according to script in Hollywood, especially at an award show. What is the biggest, maybe not disaster, but weird, unforeseen thing that got thrown at you in the middle of a show, and what did you do to resolve it?
Wow. I'm trying to think. There was a time when people who did what we do used to say, let's make sure something catches us by surprise so that it looks like a live show and people know that it's live. And, I used to say to anyone who said that to me, don't worry, it will simply happen. There's no way to control it. You just never know. It's run the gamut. We've had times in which there was one time when we were 25 minutes away from going on the air when someone passed away. I think it was Jessica Tandy passed away on a Sunday.
Yes.
And we had the the worst situation was in September of 2001. Ellen DeGeneres was hosting, and we were on a Sunday night, and on the previous Tuesday we had the attacks, you know, on the World Trade Center. The show was postponed. 4 weeks later, we mounted the show again. It was on CBS. And it became a two-city show. In New York, it was now a show in which we were going to be doing the Emmys both in New York and in Los Angeles. And in New York, we had Walter Cronkite to host. We had Giuliani. We were going to do it out of Studio 8H. And it was really going to be a wonderful show. We had the UCLA USC choir out here that was going to sing a song at the end with there was a New York police officer who had a wonderful, wonderful voice, and we were going to very emotional show, and Ellen was really prepared with it, and we were in the dress rehearsal about 2 hours and 20 minutes before going on the air. And we were going full steam. We had a satellite hooked up. We were, you know, connecting New York to here, rehearsing back and forth. It was all going very, very well. And the trophy girl walked over to me. You know, one of the girls that hands the Emmys out to the winners. And honestly, I never ever speak to the trophy girls. I mean, other people hire them and rehearse them and all that. But the trophy girl came over to me and said, "Mr. Mischer, my mother just called me from Kansas City and said that the Emmys have been canceled." And no, I had no idea. That ended up being true, and I had no idea.
That was the Afghan invasion, right?
That was we had storming in Afghanistan or Iraq, maybe. I don't remember.
It was Afghan.
Maybe
yeah.
it was Afghanistan. I think it was Afghanistan.
Okay, the screen is frozen up there.
Announced on the news, and the trophy girl let me know, and you know, but that's just part of what happens.
Wow, I was there. I was out front on the red carpet with E! Network when we went through the same ordeal. Oh, by the way, there's not going to be an Emmys this year. You know, back in the old days, you mentioned shutting off the bar. I remember talking to some producers way back in the days when there were actually, you know, liquor bottles on the tables. Remember, the Emmys would be at a banquet. The Oscars were too for a while. And you had the problem of a lot of drunk stars. And I remember one story of Ben Gazzara being so blotto they had to lock him up in the green room back. He was supposed to be a presenter, and they went, "Oh God, we can't let him loose." And he was ripping down the door, doing everything he could to get out there. They managed to keep him backstage. But have you ever had, and obviously we don't have to name the celebrity, but have you ever had an out-of-control celebrity backstage where you said, "We'll just get rid of this person and replace him with this person"?
You know, I don't ever recall anyone being inebriated, and that's a surprise now that I think about it, now that you asked that question, because you would have certainly thought that would have happened. No, that happened. And we've had accidents. You know, Jennifer Lawrence 2 years ago slipped at the Oscars on her way up the stairs. You know, we've done shows like we did the Billboard Awards last year in Las Vegas, in which, you know, Miguel tried to jump over the mosh pit, and we had rehearsed it with no people in the mosh pit, and we kept warning everybody that when there's people there, you can't quite jump as far. But anyway, a jump was made, and a young lady was hit. You know, those are just things that happen, and suddenly it was hilarious because within 2 minutes, the #1 hashtag sweeping the social community was lawsuit. And, you know, even in 9/11, on that year, finally in November, no longer at the Nokia, but now at the Schubert Theater, before that show went on the air, Gary Smith took over because I was going on to produce the opening ceremonies of the Salt Lake City Olympics, but I was there with Gary that night. And we noticed the World Series happened to be that night, and the Yankees were playing the Arizona Diamondbacks. And Gary and I noticed that every time we came out of a commercial break, the house was getting increasingly empty. And so after the third commercial, I went back into the lobby, and I realized that in the lobby during the commercial break, the baseball game was being broadcast on the monitor.
I remember this. I was backstage. Yes.
And so nobody would be coming back in. So Gary and I huddled up, and we said, okay, we can't do this. They got to stay here. So we said, okay. So what we're going to do now is, the minute we go to a commercial, the second we go to the commercial, we're going to put the World Series game, and I think it was game number 7. Okay, we're going to put the game on the big screen, and we did that. Okay, and we kept the people there. But what we didn't realize was, I said, let's keep this thing on as long as we can before and then cut the feed just before we come up out of commercial. And that's exactly what we did. When we faded up out of commercial, we had 2,000 people booing loudly at us.
And I remember Gary kept coming out giving sports scores to updates, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, and then David Hill at Fox Sports, who was carrying the Yankee broadcast, he started announcing who was winning the Emmys, saying you can watch the World Series, you don't have to go and listen to the Emmys. So we had Ellen start to announce the score during the show, But it was one of those little moments that I know I will never forget.
That's great, Chris.
For this next Emmy ceremony, I want to ask you, 4 years ago when Jimmy hosted, you started a new thing that they've kept going the last 4 years, and that is combining all the comedy categories and then all the drama categories.
Yeah, the genres. Yeah,
is that something?
Genres, again, you're breaking up, but I think I know your question. But we are going to continue with the genres. It's a nice way to kind of focus on all the things that happened in comedy or all the things that happened in miniseries or movies during the evening. And since we did it the first time 4 years ago, it's been followed kind of in one form or another. So we're going to stick with that because we think it's something that did work.
Okay, Chris, I'll give you the last question. We'll wrap up after this. What is it?
You have on the Emmy ballot this summer, you've got the Breakthrough Prize ceremony that was back in January, hosted by Kevin Spacey. How is that different from other of these live events that you've done?
Well, it was very different. Look, we're fortunate enough to do a lot of big entertaining things. Work. This was really different because a Russian venture capitalist called us, Yuri Milner, and said, look, I'm working with some people in Silicon Valley, and we want to try and raise the profile of scientists. Yuri said, there was a time when scientists were celebrities and in which they were household names and in which they appeared on magazine covers and in newspapers, and he meant like Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, people like that. He said, but they just really kind of fallen out of favor. So we want to do something that will reward those people who have dedicated their life to science and really cross some sort of threshold. And that just really sounded fascinating to us. So to make a long story short, we ended up doing this. Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jack Ma, partnered up with Yuri, and we gave 9 prizes in life sciences and in physics and in mathematics, and in one 45-minute period of time in a remarkable location up at a NASA air base in very close to Stanford, up in Silicon Valley. We gave $27 million away. We gave 9 scientists $3 million each. No strings attached. Did not have to use it to invest in their work, although many of them did make that decision. And it was interesting because we found a lot of people in the Hollywood community who actually were quite interested in science. I mean, I knew that Anne Hathaway was a student of physics, and I had heard that when she's on a movie set, she's often reading physics books and theories and string theory and reading about wormholes and in the universe. And there are many other ones. Ashton Kutcher, Mila Kunis, there are many other ones who are really, really interested in science. So it was kind of an opportunity to bring together a little bit of the Hollywood community, all the leaders in the technological, innovative fields where Silicon Valley is far ahead of everybody else. And and then also a distinguished audience. I mean, from Jeffrey Katzenberg to Rupert Murdoch, a great audience, and it was just a really interesting evening in which scientists were celebrated. And these guys are not like guys who live in an academic tower in some remote university campus. I mean, they're accessible, they're interesting, they have hobbies, they continuously face defeats, they face challenges, some kind of way. They get their families to understand why they are so preoccupied and working so hard to do what they do. And what they have done is really remarkable. And we were able to convey that in a layman's way through some wonderful films that were made by a lot of high-quality filmmakers here. And it was fun to do. And I think it's going to kind of become an institution now.
Great. Now, you're also on the Emmy ballot for the Don Rickles thing. Now, did you have to put a saddle on that guy throughout doing the whole show? He's such a live wire.
We actually, he is, and we really had fun with that. And it was amazing how the community responded to wanting to be up there with Don. And when you think about the range of people that we had, from Johnny Depp to to Marty Scorsese, De Niro, Brian Williams of NBC News, and it was just one of those evenings. A lot of those comics had come there saying, "I've got to go to work at 7. I'm going to come and do my bit and then leave." And the room, it just became so incredible in the room at the Apollo, which is a small, intimate theater, that people just hung around and they stayed. And it was, it's one of those things that kind of turns out a little bit magical. I mean, it doesn't happen every time you do these things, but it was fun. And he was, physically, he's a little bit impaired, but mentally, man, he's sharp as a tack. And there was really some funny stuff in there. Really some funny stuff. It was fun.
Well, good luck to you winning Emmys and staging the next one, Don. This was really long overdue for us to chat with you. A great thrill for us, and we appreciate it. Thanks.
I really enjoyed talking to both of you, and we should do it more often. And I'm sorry if I went on too long with some of this stuff.
No, I'm just worried that your tea is getting cold.
That's right. Okay. All right, thanks.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.